So when it comes to banks, banks are crucial to incentivizing companies or de-incentivizing companies to take steps towards net zero, towards sustainability, towards understanding that we live on a round, finite planet. So how is your bank working to help your clients assess and mitigate the risk? And how are you helping to incentivize them to take actions that are towards a future that's better than the one we have today?
Yeah. Yeah, we started this in 2013 and it was based on a speech of one of my colleagues who was a mathematician and making models, but he spoke about his youth and he saw the environment change. And that led to an enormous movement in the bank to start to talk to clients about climate change and how we could help. So we said, yeah, let's do that. But then quickly we said, yeah, but what do we now talk about? So we had to educate ourselves. And then we went to many of our customers to talk about, and at the time, I think 70%, I'm making the number up, of our clients said, sustainability, what? And 20%, yeah, we got this guy or girl, yeah, we come over, ING, haha, wants to talk about this. And maybe for 5 or 10%, this was really boardroom talk. Now, that is not the case anymore. So that is the good news. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in ING focused on sustainability in their sectors. We're a big sector financier, especially for corporates. Let me talk about transition finance, since we talked, I think that Christian talked largely about physical risk, and that's also important for banks, but a very big topic in banks is transition risk. How do we transition from a carbon-intensive economy to a carbon-extensive economy? Leaving biodiversity aside, which is even a bigger topic almost. So we do three main things. First of all, we educate, and we have sustainability finance teams that educate on the risks for companies for climate change, and we have financial specialists that advise on how to finance or get sustainability loans and how to structure these loans. So we educate. The second thing we do is we finance. And we finance two types of financing, if you will. First of all is behavior-based financing. ING was the first bank that helped Philips. It was the first bank that issued a sustainable loan. That was a loan linked to criteria that Philips had in 2017 to improve the CO2 intensity of its processes. And so we set targets of what they need to do, and if they then reach these targets, the interest rate goes down, so there's also financial benefit to it. And the second type of financing is use of proceeds finance. So financing, for example, a windmill park or batteries or solar panels or what have you. So that's the second topic, so financing. And the third topic is, in the end, we developed an approach called Terra, what's in the name, whereby we were, based on the scientific approach of the IEA, were able for our most climate-intensive sectors to measure what the intensity was of these sectors and how we could become in line in those sectors with Paris 1.5 degrees. And so we started to measure very well, but we don't need to measure also, we also need to manage. And that's why we now have, and I'm actually quite proud of that as a next step, but this is not perfection overnight, but it's continuous adjustment. We now have thousands of climate plans of our clients in our system. So with each loan that that gives us two elements. Two, we can talk much better with our clients how they can transition to net zero themselves, but also we know much better with each loan that we do how then the CO2 footprint is impacted. And so therefore we have much more direct ways to steer. And let me give you this example, and the numbers are fictional. So let's say that from a CO2 intensity point of view, for the automotive industry, you have to go from 100 in 2023 to 40 by 2030. And then you say, okay, if you do that linearly, that needs to be -10 per annum, if that would be linearly. I'm just making it up. Yeah. But that also means that I can now say to the head of automotive in ING, okay, we are now at 100, choose as you like, but next year we're going to be at 90, because we can directly steer on these climate plans. So education, financing, and discussing with our customers to directly steer on the climate impact that they're making.
I think that's very powerful, providing examples, because we're asking people to do things that they've never done before, but providing examples is a way to help to incentivize that. So now, I know if you're anything like me, you probably have things you want to say in response to what other people said. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to do that, but in order to hear from everybody, if you could keep your comments to 1 minute.
Oh my God.
1 minute. So, Mariana, do you have something burning that you'd like to say?
Well, just to support, I think it's fascinating what you said, but we should also remember there's the private banking industry, there's also a public banking industry, which currently is not aligned. We have 22.2 trillion, that's 12 zeros, in the national development banks, like BNDES in Brazil, 2.4 trillion in the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, and they're not aligned, and they're not actually causing then also multiplier effect inside the private sector. So imagine if you had the regional public banks working closer with the national public banks around climate-related missions, and then those conditionalities like the ones I gave an example of with the KfW, any loan given to the private sector should be conditional on any sort of innovation, on processes, on anything that has to do with reducing the material content of production, net zero, so on and so forth. It would be immense. And that's just the public financial sector, let alone what's happening in the private sector.
Excellent point.
Can I come in to say, I mean, just back on the issue of, for the longest time, right, and this is maybe to what you were saying, Mariana, the goods, they all, i.e. what makes a profit, etc., has been in the private hand, but all the bads, that's the government problem. And so as long as that's the system, I mean, we're screwed, right? I mean, this is not going to work. It doesn't compute. So therefore, we need to have a conversation about that system. And that system then needs to understand, therefore, that we need to see some transfers, we need to see some alignment, we need to have a system which does not just fix the bads, which they are, and we are living them, but in fact, which proactively projects that this or that policy will need to be in place. Yeah. And to enable that, then, there is that broader global conversation that we will need to have in place. But it's very, very hard because we have not understood that what science tells us must lead to policy. Yep. Now, on some things that are very, very dear to my heart, my health, okay, oops, we have understood the science tells us that this thing is really going to kill us. Okay, we will have a policy. But that bigger thing that might very well kill us, it's on the too difficult list. Let's just stay with what we have. And this is that disconnection that we have as humans and as a civilization, understanding the immediate, that which seems to immediate, my health, my child's health. Yeah. The science tells me thus, I'm going to get the meds, right? But the bigger problem we're not solving. And I think the conversation, therefore, has to be one about holding to account. And it has to begin to a large extent, and I want to pick up on the MDB and the public banks, because this is the money of the taxpayer. And so there has to be an alignment. I spent 15 years at the World Bank, did 2 vice presidencies there, and was always arguing that the bank has to be the green bank. It has to be that realigned bank. Thankfully now we have Ajay there, and we can hope that some of that realignment may begin to happen. It's late, but it is very, very clear that the kind of investments, I have the privilege of living in Nairobi, which is where the headquarters of UNEP is. That means that we're very close to a very real situation of poverty, energy poverty, inadequacy of investment, very highly priced investments, financing that is very difficult to catch. But of course, because the risk is high, the risk is priced high. So that's why we need to have the base load, the base level investment that has to be on the public purse to enable the private sector to come in. We have to be very, very mindful, my last point here, that South Sudan is an oil producer, 7.9% access to modern electricity. Okay? Uganda, an oil producer. Tanzania, an oil producer. Mauritania, an oil producer. Ghana, an oil producer. Nigeria, with lots of issues, an oil producer. Those that I mentioned do have massive development problems. But nobody's going to invest in renewable energy. Is the message of the world to them, keep it in the ground? It is, right? Would you? if you were the finance minister. The reality is that we need to have a global conversation about some shifts of resources, because otherwise this will not work.
So the distance you mentioned is really interesting. It's what she was referring to is something called psychological distance. And it's a human tendency, it's just the way we're wired, to view risks, especially risks that we feel that we cannot solve or address adequately, as distant from us in time and or in space and or in relevance, as well as being abstract rather than concrete. And when it comes to climate change, it ticks every box. You ask people, are you worried? They say yes. Will it affect future